Thank you so much. It's my pleasure and my honor to present on behalf of the present and past teaching and development team of this course. The original developers of this course were Peggy DeJong and Amber Hastings-Truelove, with input from Lindsay Brandt, as well as I actually was the educational developer, instructional designer that was part of the team that helped them develop their virtual modules and the assessment structure. And as a full circle moment, last fall I had the opportunity to co-teach the course for the first time. So colonization is a determinant of Indigenous peoples' health. As a result of Western Eurocentric-based policies and strategies, particularly when we're thinking about healthcare, Indian residential schools and the Indian hospital system have had profound impacts on the way Indigenous folks, that is First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples in Canada experience healthcare. They have experienced a loss of culture, loss of land, and a narrowing of focus into one singular worldview, which has impacted them in terms of experiencing very high rates of racism within the healthcare system, as well as erasure of their knowledge systems. So this results in a decrease in trust in the healthcare system, engagement and access. And so as you can imagine, this has profound impacts on health outcomes among Indigenous peoples. And so over 10 years ago, you should be aware that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada put out 94 calls of actions to address the legacies of the residential school system. As part of those calls to action are health-specific related calls to action to address systemic injustices in the healthcare sector. And in particular, it called governments and health bodies to provide cultural competency training for all healthcare professionals, and also require training in the history and legacy of what I just covered previously and its impacts on the healthcare system. And so the course I'm talking about today directly addresses this call to action. It is the Indigenous Health Professions Education course that is found within the Masters of Health Professions Education program offered through the Faculty of Health Science, Office of Professional Development and Educational Scholarship. And it is the 6th of 8 courses in the program, sorry. And while this course integrates Indigenous perspectives as core principles throughout every course in the program, the 806 course addresses Indigenous health issues specifically. And the types of students that take this course are often, can be any health professional from early, mid to late career, who is interested in pursuing more teaching roles or working in an academic setting. So they have the clinical skills, but they may not have the teaching skills. And many learners report taking this course specifically because of this course. And so, next slide. The way the course has been designed is to address the history of Indigenous people in Canada, cultural competency training, and ways to decolonize both their clinic and their teaching practice, and understand how to undertake Indigenous scholarship. And so all of these features embody Indigenous ways of knowing, doing, believing, and feeling, and it's built into the structure of the course. So we can't integrate all Indigenous knowledge systems in Canada. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit worldviews are unique, and there's over 600 First Nations in Canada. You cannot cover everything, but by offering examples of how different worldviews can integrate into healthcare and education, we hope to develop a sense of critical consciousness within the learner, as understanding of how to navigate and operate alongside different ways of viewing health, wellness, clinical care, and health education. So how do we address this in a course? The first thing we've thought about was using the metaphor of the woven basket and the copper pot that's offered by Smith and Joan Blood. And when it comes to truth and reconciliation work in healthcare spaces, so whose work is it? So reclamation of language, culture, wellness and health practices, and engagement with territory is the work of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. But the work of addressing cultural competency, racism within healthcare spaces is done alongside Indigenous folks, but is the work of the settlers or the copper pot. And so it is the learner's responsibility to commit to the unlearning journey and build the confidence and skills to develop, teach, and lead culturally competent and educational and therapeutic spaces. And how do we know we're accountable? Well, cultural competency is a patient-reported metric. So you cannot tell someone they're being given culturally competent care. The patient has to tell you. So it's inherently a relational process. And that's something that we wanted to bring forward into the course. And so in our assessment structure, we took a two-eyed seeing approach. And then that means honoring both Indigenous and Western ways of knowing, using the strengths of both to shape how we teach and how we assess. It's not a traditional top-down course. It's co-created with learners, and we're all unlearning together. And every course is co-taught with a settler educationalist and an Indigenous health professional. So we get both sides throughout the course. And the learner's growth and development is what we're aiming for. Assessment starts with the learner as a whole person, not just what they know cognitively. We use scaffolded reflection, and we're building it incrementally so learners aren't overwhelmed, but are consistently growing. And learners are asked, what can you actually change in your practice? So it's keeping it real and actionable. And then we utilize a holistic assessment approach. So we use a medicine wheel, which accesses emotional, spiritual, physical dimensions. So I'm going to use my instructional design background. We start with formative self-reflections every 2 weeks. This is 1 or 2 paragraphs where they can react to the content, process it, and as instructors, we provide short written feedback that acknowledges their experiences, but then also asks them questions to grow further. In between are summative knowledge translation assignments that are thematic around culturally safe care, implementing Indigenous pedagogies into the teaching classroom, and a focus on applying the TRC to their practice. And then that leads to an ungrading assignment where they actually evaluate their progress throughout the course, reflect on it through guided prompts, and are asked to give themselves a grade. As co-instructors, we critically appraise their grade and we agree or ask for a slight adjustment. So here is our circular rubric. If you're more interested on the basis of this rubric, Lefevre is the original developer of the spiritual aspect of this rubric. And we use the summative assignment to prompt them about what can they change in their practice. And there's, as we normally might see in a Bloom's taxonomy, there's the intellectual component, so analyzing the information, synthesizing. Physical is in terms of translating that knowledge into practice. Emotional is more the relational aspect with others, and then honoring the spiritual aspect and self-actualization is more about getting the learner to see themselves in the responsibilities they have towards the TRC. And so in practice, we would circle a part of this rubric, write some feedback, and submit it back to the learner. So they get significant formative feedback throughout the course. And then in the ungrading aspect, they have some prompts in terms of their critical knowledge, and then as well as how they engaged with the content, with their peers. Did they actually do the work to the best of their abilities? Did they stretch themselves in their assignments? We're always pushing them in their assignments. What could you do better? This is a great start. How could you engage others in your work and make it better for your context? All right, and we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thanks, Jenny. I have a question about the grading of the reflection. I also teach a course where there's a reflection assignment, and I've adjusted how the grading of that happens, because certainly sometimes feels really awkward to grade a reflection. So in my case, I try and grade how the reflection was done based on a set of sort of guides for reflecting, as opposed to what the content of the reflection. But I'm curious to know, you said you sometimes ask for a slight adjustment. Can you talk a little bit more about when that might happen and how you do that?
Yeah, so the process of ungrading is something first developed by Jesse Stomel, I believe, if you look that up. Stomel, thank you. And so in what we do is we really focus on that constructive feedback throughout the course. And it's the learner, we try to get the learner to not focus on the letter grade and on the actual words. And there's actually kind of short definitions that we offer with the words that kind of describe the qualities that come out of their submissions. And so a submission might be very emotional. This is a very emotional topic. These are clinicians with many years of experience, many years of education, and they come into the course not realizing Indian hospitals was a thing. And that may greatly impact how their Indigenous patients perceive them without them, that they're still a great person, but there's that history that they weren't aware of. And so by kind of allocating that experience to, oh, you're honoring that you have these emotions about not knowing. It's okay that you don't know. Okay, what are you going to do with that? How are you going to action that to prevent inadvertent racisms in your interactions with others? And so the prompts that we use at the end really, we want them to make the case of why they tried hard in the course, and like how can you, using your assignments that you have submitted, like reflecting on those assignments that you submitted, did you put your best foot forward? Is what you recognize you grew throughout the course, and that's really what we're evaluating, the growth, not exactly, the first assignment's usually pretty rough. They're not really sure what to make of the structure of the course, because it's not like a square rubric, essentially. And near the end of the course, most people are pretty accurate in terms of acknowledging how much growth they have or haven't done, because they also acknowledge how much work they put in or haven't put in, and they're pretty honest about that. And our rubric only does go to B-, so that has some implications for how people perceive themselves to be graded. We often don't change the grade. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so I can give you, it's very context dependent, and everyone's on a different spectrum of sort of their learning and unlearning on this journey. Some people enter the course being like, oh yes, my institution's really into this. Not many people are actually applying it, but I understand the concept. Versus others are just like, what? And they're like processing that emotionally the first couple weeks of the course. And so just as a brief example, I did pull up the exact definitions from Lefevre that we do provide the learners. Is so honoring refers to being conscious and aware of our own thoughts and feelings without judging and being open to new experiences. Where empowered means relates to giving and receiving support in an environment that fosters confidence and strength. So in their writing, you can kind of identify a learner kind of growing in their confidence as the semester proceeds. And even in their questions in class, like we do meet with them 6 times in a virtual session, so we do build relationships. It is a cohort-based course. They know each other, program. and there's about 25 students. So the numbers are lower, and so there's opportunities for more one-on-one discussions or group discussions where people can learn from each other. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, yes. Essentially, everything they do in their course is evidence for the last step. They don't get a grade ever in the course until the last day of class, essentially, where they submit their here's my circular rubric, and this is my justification on why I deserve an A minus in this course. I fall into, like, in the spiritual domain, I feel like I have progressed to the empowered stage because of this is what I did in the course. At the beginning, I was very unsettled, and now I feel confident to bring this forward in my teaching, and so on and so forth. So they're very hard on themselves, I have to say.